Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we really need to take some time to revisit the president's behavior in Hawaii yesterday. Let's start at the beginning. Lahaina, Maui, suffers 2 weeks ago its worst forest fire in its history, worst in America in over a century. The death toll so far is already over 100, but there are nearly 1,000 people missing, and the majority of those people are children. You see, the schools were closed, children were home, parents were at work, and the kids were trapped. They didn't know where to go, they couldn't get out. Sadly, it appears 2 weeks later that they burned. Those children are dead. But the tragedy, as it's unfolded, is so consequential that it was determined that our consoler-in-chief, our empathetic, sympathetic President Biden, remember, when he was running for president in 2020, people were saying empathy is on the ballot. Donald Trump has no empathy. We need to get back to the norms. Joe Biden, we need that man, that decent man in the White House. Well, that decent man for 2 weeks was lounging on the beach in Rehoboth, Delaware, and refused to even say anything about the Maui fires. He rode past on his bike as reporters were shouting, "Will you say anything to us about Hawaii?" He ignored them. Finally, as he was packing the car, leaving Rehoboth, Delaware, he said this.
President, any comments on the rising death toll in Maui?
Will you come talk about the Hawaii response, Mr. President?
No, he won't talk to you about the Hawaii response. No comment. Nothing to say. He got back to the White House, and within 2 days, he went off on another vacation because, who among us? He went to Lake Tahoe, and it was determined over the weekend, I guess because they took a poll or did some market testing, that it's time for Biden, 2 weeks later, to go and visit the scene. So he lands in Lahaina, and I want to remind you, as you see the images that you're about to see, you'll see burnt-out buildings behind him. Those burnt-out buildings represent homes that people were living in. They probably represent the final resting place for up to 1,000 people who are missing and children who are missing. They're probably dead. Their remains are right there behind the president, like a crematorium, like a cemetery. So here comes our consoler-in-chief, Mr. Empathy, and he starts introducing people, and he mangles their names and then starts making jokes. Take a look.
Brian Chance, our Senator Maisie. By the way, Maisie, I told my granddaughter, whose name is Maisie as well, she said, that's why I like her. Anyway, but her name is Maisie as well. And Jill Takuda, Representative Ed Chase.
Your granddaughter is named the same name as the senator, and oh, by the way, nobody gives a His granddaughter, one of them that he acknowledges, is probably the same age as one of the dead, burnt corpses laying in the earth behind him. This is disgusting. At this point, I'd love to say, if a Republican, but you know how that ends, and so why bother? Then, of course, the moment where he's let off the stage because he's dazed and confused and has no idea where he is or where he's supposed to go.
Ready? You want to grab that water for a second?
Pathetic. But I guess we're used to that by now, or we should be used to it. But I don't know if we can ever be used to the leader of the free world being led around like he's the star of Weekend at Bernie's 4. Then he starts meeting firefighters. And again, I remind you, this was an inferno. Everything's scorched. There's nothing left but ashes, including the bodies that are lying there in state. And, well, he sees a dog, and the dog has little booties on his paws, and here's what he says.
What's the boss's name? I said, how you doing, pal? Boots on too. You guys catch the boots out here? That's some hot ground, man.
That's some hot ground, man. It's the scene of an inferno. Children are dead. But honestly, that's not even the worst of it. Here is the worst of it.
I don't want to compare difficulties, but we have a little sense, Jill and I, what it's like to lose a home. Years ago, now 15 years ago, I was in Washington doing Meet the Press. It was a sunny Sunday, and lightning struck at home on a little lake that's outside of our home, not a lake, a big pond, and hit a wire and came up underneath our home into the heating ducts, the air conditioning duct. To make a long story short, I almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. But all kidding aside, I watched the firefighters, the way they responded. You know, there's an old expression. I grew up right across the street from a fire hall in Claymont, Delaware.
All right, enough. That's enough. That's enough. I know exactly what you've been through. I had a fire in my house. I almost lost my home, my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. He did not almost lose his home. It was a kitchen fire. The reports at the time say that it was contained within 20 minutes. He did not almost lose his wife. He didn't lose his 67 Corvette that he chuckled about there. That was a memorial service. I know exactly what you're going through. I assure you that his home was never in danger. You know how I know the fire wasn't big? Because the classified documents he kept in that home for the last 30 years were untouched. Also, he says he was doing Meet the Press that day in Washington, D.C. He heard about the fire and then went home and then tell stories about how he saw the firemen contain the fire. I assure you he did not get back to Rehoboth, Delaware, or Wilmington, Delaware, in 20 minutes from Washington, D.C. He did not see firefighters contain the fire. It was already contained. It was contained by the time he got into the car going down the elevator at Meet the Press. This is a horrible human being. Can I say once again, if a Republican, why bother? Meanwhile, later in the day, as members of clergy and family members and grieving parents were speaking at the event, President Biden finally did something dignified.
Never meant before. We are a community that relies on family, on ohana, whether by blood or by friendship.
Yeah, he fell asleep. But the good news is, while he was sleeping, he couldn't tell some made-up story about his own personal tragedy, so he could empathize with the real victims. Hey, let's take a quick look at how the Washington Post wrote up this story. Here's their lead paragraph. President Biden, First Lady Jill Biden arrived in the grief-stricken community Monday afternoon, touring damage from one of the deadliest wildfires in American history, attempting to channel one of the president's signature traits, comforting those who have lost loved ones. Needless to say, nowhere in the article is any reference to the made-up story about the tragedy of almost losing the president's 67 Corvette. And the Democrats think we've got 5 more years of this. I don't think we can endure 5 more months of this. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Keep it here on the Salem News Channel. Have you noticed you haven't seen a lot in the news lately about the January 6th proceedings? Well, that's because the news has not been good for the Justice Department, especially the prosecutors and the judges who have completely overstepped their guidelines and the law in prosecuting so many of the people who were involved in the events that day. But I know what's going on because I read Julie Kelly's great new Substack. It's called Declassified with Julie Kelly, and she joins us now. Julie, thank you for being here. Congratulations on the new venture.
Thanks so much, Larry. Thanks for having me on, as always.
So the other day there was an appeals process in appellate court, and it did not go well for the judges in the Justice Department. Tell me what happened.
That's right, a rare victory for justice and fairness in terms of how the laws are applied. As we know, this DOJ and federal judges in D.C. have weaponized laws such as obstruction of an official proceeding, seditious conspiracy, and the most common misdemeanor, which is parading in the Capitol, a petty offense that the chief judge of the D.C. District Court admitted federal courts rarely deal with, but yet they're dealing with hundreds of parading convictions and plea deals. Then what they've been doing in addition to that, Larry, is imposing excessive sentences for this petty offense. Judges have, at the behest of this DOJ, have imposed what's called a split sentence, incarceration and probation for these individuals who have pleaded guilty or been convicted of parading. So what happened was one January 6th defendant appealed his split sentence, and the D.C. Circuit Court came back with a pretty harsh ruling condemning both the DOJ and the D.C. federal courts for intentionally, flagrantly violating federal sentencing guidance, which says you can either impose incarceration or probation, but not both, especially for a Class B misdemeanor like parading in the Capitol.
Yeah, and it's to say they've been overzealous is kind of understating it. It's been outrageous what we've seen here and what you've documented, Julie. And I know that there have been hundreds and hundreds of charges already put forth. Are there still people who are waiting to have their official day in court, that they're still being incarcerated without having a day in court?
Yes, can you believe it? I know of at least a few defendants who have now been held, denied bail for more than 2.5 years, awaiting trial as the DOJ.
Oh, looks like
People like Ryan Samsel.
I'll tell you what, we're going to reconnect with Julie Kelly in a moment because it's too important not to have this conversation. But I do want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing right now in the news. There was an article written by some law professors that said because of the January 6th insurrection and the charges against President Trump, well, President Trump is ineligible for running for president because of the 14th Amendment. You know, you can't hold federal office if you're guilty of insurrection. But let's pick it up right there, Julie Kelly. As far as you know, with the hundreds, in fact, I think it was 1,000 people now, a little over 1,000 who were arrested from January 6th. Has anyone actually been charged with insurrection?
No, no one has been charged. And you're right, 1,100 defendants now. No one has been charged with insurrection. Roughly less than 24 have been charged with this seditious conspiracy. But no, that's why to call it an insurrection, I write in my piece on my Substack, they should call it a parade instead of an insurrection, because that is the most common charge that's been levied against January 6th defendants.
So if you buy into the fact that this happened because of Donald Trump's management or planning or inspiration, that he led this thing, he would really be guilty of leading a parade. An illegal parade, but a parade nonetheless. But how can you say that Donald Trump is guilty of leading an insurrection when none of the people actually arrested that day have been charged with insurrection?
That's right. Well, because it's all this carefully crafted, as you know, media and Democratic Party narrative, the term insurrection, the word insurrection was planted that afternoon by the news media, by people like Nancy Pelosi's daughter, who was posting that on Twitter, by Joe Biden, who at 4 o'clock Eastern time, when things were still going on at the Capitol, referred to this as an insurrection. But here we are now, more than 2.5 years later, no one charged with insurrection, but yet parading. Yeah. And Larry, that is not a cue for you to start singing show tunes.
Before
the
parade passes by does come to mind, or don't rain on my parade, but I will ignore the impulse. Julie, the one time when I try to engage with people about January 6th, people have very passionate feelings about this. Once in a while, I can get somebody to come around to the idea. It's like, okay, yes, it wasn't as bad as the media says, and yeah, you know, some of these people, they're being overcharged. But those Proud Boys, now that's different. They're just set and determined that the Proud Boys who were arrested that day really were the rebels. They were the ones who were causing the insurrection. So what goes with the Proud Boys? Because based on your reporting, there was an FBI plant in the middle. There was a federal informer right there surrounded by the Proud Boys.
Oh, there were at least a few. Larry, during the seditious conspiracy trial, which I covered, the government had to stipulate, meaning admit at least 8 FBI informants had been run into the Proud Boys. During cross-examination of one government witness, the defense got them to admit there were more than a dozen. There could have been up to 20 FBI informants embedded not just in this group, but in these group chats that were then used as evidence against the Proud Boys. Look, say what you want about the Proud Boys. None of them brought weapons to the Capitol. None of them were charged with assaulting police officers. One of them you could see on surveillance video walking through an open door with 4 or 5 Capitol police officers standing right there. We still don't have answers about the total number of not just FBI informants, but undercover agents from multiple departments, including DC Metro, Secret Service, Capitol Police, and the FBI, who were involved. People who see these scenes, and I have one of these on my Substack from a few weeks ago, who see these scenes of violence or chaos or instigating, we know that some of them are undercover agents and FBI informants. So the Proud Boys now, DOJ coming back and asking for 20 to 33 years in prison for seditious conspiracy convictions. This is an egregious selective political persecution that no one should support, but of course half the country does.
What do we know about Michael Jones in particular? You name him in your article, and has the FBI or any federal agency actually confirmed that Michael Jones, this person you name, was in fact an informant?
There has been some reporting that has confirmed it. As I say, I have on my Substack video of him outside and inside the Capitol breaking multiple laws. He's on video everywhere, including near our buddy Ray Epps and inside the Capitol. The big tell that he is an FBI informant is that the DOJ and FBI has the video of him, and he still has not been charged with a single crime for January 6th, because the FBI informants are allowed to commit crimes in pursuit of keeping up their front as an informant, and they are never charged. And there's Michael Jones right there.
See, but this is incredibly important, Julia, because if I'm a defendant in this case, and there's video of this guy who's an FBI agent, or informant, I should say, and he's instigating violence, and he's breaking the law, and clearly he's getting away with it, well, that sends a message to me that I can do the same thing. Now, that's not saying my behavior is right, but if my behavior was guided by, inspired by, encouraged by a guy who was put there by the FBI and who gets a get-out-of-jail-free card, that feels like entrapment.
It absolutely is entrapment. And I think a few defendants have actually filed entrapment defense motions that have, of course, gone nowhere, because the DOJ, thanks to also DC federal judges, have really covered up successfully the role that these informants have played. And again, not just the informants, we have seen on video undercover DC Metro police officers dressed like Trump supporters, acting like Trump supporters, chanting with the group, leading people up to that West Terrace onto the scaffolding. So it's not even that, they are entrapping, they're acting like it, they're provoking, to your point, these actions, but yet not a single judge has said, wait a second, we need more information about what all of these bad actors were doing to either lure these people in or make it look like they were Trump supporters on these videos and optics that say the January 6th Select Committee produced. And that's why people like who you're talking to think that the Proud Boys were solely responsible for the attack on the Capitol, tried to overthrow the government, but have no idea the deep role that several agencies played in provoking and promoting that narrative.
Well, and it's because the television networks that they watch don't tell them. The viewers there are woefully uneducated and misinformed. That's why we enjoy having you on. Thank you so much, Julie Kelly. I appreciate you joining us. And again, it's Declassified with Julie Kelly. That's the Substack, and get on over there. I know I'm part of it. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. This is the Salem News Channel. We now know, we think, that President Trump isn't going to be on the debate stage Wednesday night. Although, honestly, if he shows up, what are they going to do? Tell him no? That would be a great move, actually, if he showed up. Come on, Donald, I'm going to be there. You should be there, too. That said, we do know where he's going to be Thursday morning. He'll be reporting to a courthouse in Fulton County, Georgia, and he'll be processed. He'll be booked. There probably will be a mugshot They'll probably sell it on mugs and T-shirts on the Trump 2024 campaign website. And it all stems from his efforts to get what he believed was a fair and honest accounting of the ballots in Georgia in 2020. The prosecutor, the district attorney in Fulton County, believes that he broke the law in that regard. Well, let's bring on the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, a man who knows a thing or two about election law in this country, J. Christian Adams. Christian, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me, Larry.
Well, listen, you work for the Justice Department, which is often the purview for issues like this. And of course, we know Jack Smith, special counsel through the Justice Department, has already charged President Trump with certain crimes leading up to January 6th. When you look at the Fulton County indictments that the president is about to get processed on, what sticks out to you?
Well, look, the Justice Department could have brought charges against these people in Georgia and didn't. That speaks volumes. Secondly, it's pretty clear to me that what they're doing in Fulton County is sort of amateur hour. It's not the same as a thorough DOJ investigation. It's like revenge time, where let's rope in all of the people who had breakfast with Donald Trump or knew him or got an email or visited, and let's make them pay a price. I was struck by how tenuous and limp a lot of these charges are against a lot of the people named.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in some respects you want prosecutors to be accountable to the voters. However, in Fulton County, Georgia, this may be the problem, that she's appealing to the voters. I mean, this sort of action in that district actually reaps great political benefits, and that way a district attorney can use the law as a political weapon like this.
And this has changed, Larry, in the last 25 or 30 years, where when I went to law school, even places like Fulton County, even places like New York Attorney General, were places where those offices, the people who held them, attempted to be credible, attempted to follow the law, attempted to be measured. They weren't just indicting people for fun. But what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, and Hans von Spakovsky and I at Heritage have written extensively about radical changes that have happened in law schools in the last just 5 or 10 years. What has happened is the law has become a political weapon to many of these people, like Fulton County prosecutors, certain people at the DOJ. A whole new generation of lawyers is coming up that are more radical, far left, borderline Marxists, if not full-on Marxists, graduating from elite law schools. Yeah. I'm not saying this DA is from an elite law school, but she's one of this crowd.
You also, as a lawyer, must be somewhat concerned about the criminal charges brought against the legal advisors to President Trump. You have people like John Eastman, who, even if you disagree with his take on the Constitution and his examination of what could or could not be done with regard to electoral college voters, he's a learned man. He's a constitutional law professor. He gave his advice, and now they've criminalized that advice, unless there's some more actions that I'm not aware of that he's being charged with.
Take it back 50 years, Larry. Imagine the lawyers who brought Roe versus Wade. Remember, there was no constitutional right to an abortion before that. And they're all sitting around. And imagine if back then some prosecutor said, if you bring these crazy radical arguments in front of the court, we might indict you, or any of the civil rights jurisprudence. Brown v. Board, that was a revolutionary theory.
Yeah.
There's revolutionary legal theories that get pushed by lawyers all the time, and yet it's become criminalized when it comes to some of the lawyers who work for President Trump.
Yeah. That said, it appears many people are speculating, as I alluded to the fact that he won't be appearing in the debate Wednesday night, that part of that might be a legal consideration. If any of the moderators ask a question about the various charges that he's facing, or if some of the other candidates make charges about it, Chris Christie comes to mind, then anything he says to defend himself on a political stage can then be used against him in the court of law. That's a horrible position that they put this candidate in.
That's why the founders put the Fifth Amendment into the Constitution, because they knew how the King's Court abused testimony by people over centuries. So it's exactly right. He He has a right under the Fifth Amendment. I'm not sure he necessarily uses it all the time, but he has a right under the Fifth Amendment to keep his mouth shut and not talk to anybody about these charges. But you're right. If he goes on that stage, he might not have that choice.
Well, and that's the problem, because sure, he has that legal right, but politically, he's standing on the debate stage and Chris Christie charges him something about these indictments. He says, I'm going to take the Fifth on that, and that's that. That doesn't help you out politically.
Right.
Christian, if I could turn to the criminal behavior, it appears the criminal behavior of the Biden the Biden family, and most specifically, maybe I was right when I said Biden administration, the extraordinary actions of the U.S. Attorney of Delaware. What we're learning more and more about David Weiss in his plan to negotiate this plea deal for Hunter Biden. And I want to remind everybody, David Weiss, the center of this growing scandal over the plea deal, is now been named the special counsel to investigate this whole mess. But Christian, it seems like he's part of the problem in this whole thing, now that we've learned that he misrepresented either to Congress or to the investigators whether he even had the power to bring charges or not.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. I mean, when I was at the Justice Department, there was a time, Larry, where I had a case where we might have needed the testimony of a reporter for USA Today. And I know that's not the same exact issue. But we had a deep respect and reverence for restraint, right? And doing the right thing when I was there. And this just seems to be thrown out the window now. Who cares if it's the right thing? And once again, this is sort of like we talked about the radicals coming out of law schools. These guys think that their law degree entitles them to be power brokers, to use the law as a weapon of power. And it's unfortunate, and that's what it seems like is happening with the special counsel problem. It's
the old anecdote that you always laugh about, the fact that a prosecutor can get a federal grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. It's like, yeah, that's right. But wait, that's not a good thing, Christian Adams. The ham sandwich didn't do anything wrong. The fact that you can get that grand jury to indict the ham sandwich that's a sign of corruption.
Yeah, the process is the pain. After that ham sandwich gets indicted, it has to hire a lawyer. Its life gets turned upside down.
Yeah.
You have to pay a lawyer a lot of money, and trust me, lawyers charge a lot of money, like a lot of money in this kind of thing. And so if you indict somebody for some ticky-tack thing, like happened maybe to Mark Meadows in Georgia, then Mark Meadows' life gets turned upside down because he faces the prospect of jail. And so he has to burn through personal savings, maybe sell property for some ridiculous ticky-tack charge. And that's exactly why the charges were brought.
Yeah, and there's just something not very kosher about indicting a ham sandwich.
That's a good one.
Thank you. All right, back to these investigators on the Hunter Biden case. It appears that Jason Smith, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and Jim Jordan, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, they're subpoenaing any IRS agent or any FBI agent that was privy to these meetings that took place, so that they will be compelled to testify whether David Weiss said that he couldn't bring charges, or that he wasn't allowed to bring charges, or he had to ask permission to bring charges. What do you think they're going for here? Why do they need more corroboration on that issue?
Well, corroboration is always good. To have more people back up what one whistleblower said is a good thing. I was in a similar situation, and I had another whistleblower jump out in public and say, yeah, that whistleblower is correct.
Yeah.
But here's the big warning sign, Larry. Who gets to enforce these subpoenas? This is the same garbage we put up with under Eric Holder, where the Justice Department will probably announce, if they haven't already, that they will not enforce these subpoenas, and they won't bring charges of contempt against any noncompliance.
Oh.
What Congress needs to learn from the Holder era is they need to do it themselves.
Yeah.
They need to be the ones who send the sergeant of arms to do what's necessary to get the testimony.
It just looks like more obstruction of justice right before our eyes as this thing unfolds. And I know, as a veteran of the Justice Department, it brings you no joy to say that. J. Christian Adams, president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Always good to talk to you, sir. Thank you. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. This here is the Salem News Channel. As you know, about 2 years ago, Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, ran in Virginia on a pretty simple notion. Parents should have a say in their children's education. In fact, they're the primary stakeholder. Their say should carry a lot of weight with the professional educators and counselors and teachers and God knows the politicians in Richmond, Virginia. Well, he won, and he's been trying to implement those policies ever since. Earlier this year, he implemented what's called the model policies for all school boards to adopt, and most specifically with regard to transgender issues. If you're a he, you're to be called he. If you're a she, you're to be called she. You can't change that or change your name unless your parent decides that you're changing that. And oh, by the way, if you were born with boy parts, you go to the boys' room and the boys' locker room, and likewise for girls. That's very controversial, apparently. And now some of the Northern Virginia, more liberal school districts are claiming they're going to ignore those policies. He appeared over on Fox News Channel and responded yesterday.
These are the exact same school systems that fought us on allowing parents to decide whether children wear a mask or whether sexually explicit materials could be removed from the curriculum, or that schools were going to stay shut for a long period of time, unnecessarily long, which resulted in massive learning loss. And these school districts will, in fact, comply with the law because it is the law and they don't have a choice.
They will comply. It's the law. They don't have a choice. Okay, how's this going to play out? Laura Hanford joins us now. She is a parents' rights advocate, and she used to serve on a committee that reported to the Fairfax County School Board. Specifically, that committee was about sex education and family life issues, right?
Correct.
So,
that's
Laura,
right. And specifically on this issue.
I got to ask you, what's the conversation going on right now at the Fairfax County school system when they saw the model policies and now they see that Governor Youngkin says, no, you will comply?
Well, I would like to be a fly on the wall in some of those conversations, quite honestly, because I think it's great that he's laying down the law, so to speak, like that, because Fairfax County has just ignored essentially the law in Virginia on parents being the ones who are rightfully in charge of directing their children's health and education.
Yeah.
They've just kind of bypassed that entirely for the last several years. They've been working their way towards that. So this is, in my book, this is really long overdue, and it's wonderful.
Do you know the mechanics of this, though? This is the Virginia Board of Education, Department of Education, that has gone through a whole public process. They've had committee hearings. They've created these model policies. Is it law? Is this something that a school board must adopt, or do they have the right to say, yeah, this isn't going to work for us?
Well, this is where it gets just a little bit murky, because the law is technically that the school boards have to adopt this law that was passed, that have to adopt policies. And the law that says that was passed a couple years ago under Governor Northam. And of course, their intent at the time was then to develop the terrible policies that they went on to develop, which said that you could have secret gender transitions in schools, and you could have entire teams of transition experts secretly working with your child, and the parents might never know for months, weeks, years. So that was their intent. That was back when the assembly was fully Democratic held. And of course, when Governor Youngkin came in, that was a big issue, because not only because of the parents there, but what was interesting in the way the law was written was that it essentially says, it gives aspects of what school boards have to adopt. And they're supposed to follow the model policies or some version thereof. So it's a little bit murky. School boards in Virginia have more leeway than school boards in some other parts of the country. What is not murky at all is the fact that Virginia law and federal law is very clear on parental rights. And so if you're going to err on any side in that murkiness, you're not in a good place if you decide that you're going to say, well, no, we're going to ignore now we even have the Board of Education policies that say this. And we're going to ignore not only that, but state and federal law on parental rights. So I would not want to be in their shoes if a lawsuit comes barreling down the track at them.
It's a little confusing, though, Laura, because, you know, a lot of these school boards in Northern Virginia, which are suburbs of Washington, D.C., when there were policies that they agreed with, as you mentioned, came from Ralph Northam, they said there were complaints. There were parents who said, we don't like this. And they said, hey, nothing we can do. It's the state law, you know. But now suddenly the state law says to go the other way. And by the way, I would argue that we have a Republican governor and a Republican majority in the House of Delegates because of those policies. Because parents said, oh, it's the law, it's coming from Richmond, then we're going to throw the bums out. And now these very same school boards are saying, to hell with you, Youngkin, we're not going to follow the law.
Well, this isn't the only time they've actually flat out lied about in Fairfax County. I got involved in this in 2015. That was when the Fairfax County School Board suddenly passed a policy that included transgender students. And they passed changes that they had been working on for 2 years quietly on the Fairfax Sex Ed Committee, which I then later was appointed to. But those changes, the school board claimed and the superintendent claimed back in 2015 that those were necessary to align with new state standards. That was a flat out lie, and they circulated it all over in all their official communications to parents. I was a Fairfax County parent. So they like to play fast and loose with the facts when it suits them.
Yeah.
But this time, the facts are really not on their side. So it will be, it needs to catch up with them. They've been ignoring parents. They've been doing stuff secretly behind parents' backs. It needs to stop.
This is an important conversation, first of all, because it's happening in the D.C. area, so that gets a lot of national attention. Also, Glenn Youngkin, who's spearheading this, he's on people's shorts lists right now as a potential running mate for the Republican nominee, or some people are saying he's still a candidate for president, possibly, depending on how he does in the off-year elections this November in Virginia. So the way this plays out is important. It's also important for so many other states that are facing very similar fights right now, Laura. So the advocates for these transgender policies, the ones that they're trying to retain, the people who are trying to resist Governor Youngkin's new plan, they're saying that this violates non-discrimination laws. They're saying that by telling these kids that they can't change their name, can't change their pronouns without parents' consent, and they can't go to a bathroom of their choice, that's violating their privacy and discrimination rights. How do we respond to that?
Well, the simple answer is that they're not adults, they're minors. And so they are, just by definition, under the care of their parents. What these activists want to do is to claim that they have some special exemption just on these grounds of this sort of tenuous discrimination or something, that these kids have a right to privacy from their own parents, and that, oh, surprise, some unrelated adult in a school that has spent minutes with a child has more right to determine what that child's identity is than a parent does. That's just absurd on the face of it. And honestly, this is something that just from the dawn of time, parents have been understood to be their kids' greatest protectors. Mm-hmm. And in a cultural nanosecond, suddenly we're supposed to believe that parents are unsafe while these unrelated people at school are safe. It's just a construct on the face of it. But more importantly, there are laws in Virginia about when you can emancipate a child and when you can't. But these activists want to pretend that in this one area of healthcare, kids can suddenly self-determine and have, essentially function as emancipated minors, but without any legal authority to do that. Wow. So they're trying to create a brand new category out of nothing. There is no right to privacy from your own parents. I'm sure kids all over the country would like that, but there isn't fundamentally.
I know
for their own good.
When I was a teenager, I certainly would have liked that too. I tried, but I had.
Don't we all?
I had parents though who were actually parents. Laura Hanford, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you talking this through with us. My pleasure. We'll keep an eye on Virginia as this develops. It's going to be quite a fight, and like I said, something that other states are watching very closely. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. This is Salem News Channel. Kamala Harris is a walking, talking, cackling disaster. I mean, it's just embarrassing. She's so inauthentic. She comes across as not incredibly intelligent. She's certainly not good at her job. Remember, she was in charge of the southern border. How's that looking these days? It's just an absolute mess. But we enjoy it because it's great television. And who doesn't like laughing at their leaders now and again? And there's a lot to laugh at over there. But there's a rehabilitation of sorts being attempted right now in Washington. Call it Kamala 8.0, because I think this is the 8th time they've tried to rehabilitate her image. And Politico, a website, newspaper, and magazine in town, boy, they're doing their damnedest to help the effort. Last month, they wrote an article, I kid you not, the headline is, "Why Kamala Harris is a Better VP Than You Think." You're stupid if you don't like Kamala Harris. You're wrong. You're the problem. Here, let us explain it to you. That's how desperate they are. And just yesterday in the much read Politico playbook, there was this little item. I love it. Take a look. Harris and her team are used to these attacks. Since the beginning of the administration, Republicans have slammed the VP, a San Francisco Democrat who is also a woman of color and the daughter of immigrants, as a way to hurt the administration, something that hasn't typically happened with other White House number twos. Oh, really, Politico? Any criticism you have against Kamala Harris is because she's a woman of color and the children of immigrants. Vice presidents never get criticized, mocked, or ridiculed in this town. Very rare for that to happen. Wasn't Dick Cheney literally Darth Vader with blood hanging from his fangs? Didn't they literally just make a movie called Veep, lampooning him as vice president? And poor Dan Quayle, for God's sake, the man's name can't even be mentioned without also including the fact that he misspelled a word one day. And last I checked, Mike Pence is still being ridiculed around Washington, D.C. because he dared to suggest that he shouldn't have a private 101 dinner with a woman who is not his wife. Something that, by the way, I think is now a rule for the House and the Senate staffers to follow. If not, it should be. You know, they call it the Joe Biden rule or the Ted Kennedy rule or any Democrat senator from days gone by. It's their rule. I call it the Harvey Weinstein rule. The point is, this is not the first time a vice president has been made fun of. Give me a break. Anyway, they even trotted out one of their writers, Politico, in a stunning orange suit to discuss the matter on MSNBC.
Allies will agree that there's been, at the very least, a gulf between kind of this behind-the-scenes Kamala Harris, that was a senator and as you just read, was ascendant in the Democratic Party, seemed like the future of the Democratic Party, and kind of the narrative that has been around D.C. since she's been vice president. They also point out that the last 8 months felt different to them, that she has emerged in a different way, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that she is finally getting a portfolio that they say is in her strengths, talking about abortion, gun safety, climate change, those kinds of things.
Oh, yes. Thank God. Finally, a Democrat who can talk about those items that Democrats never have a chance to talk about. Abortion, climate change, and gun control. That's what we need more of. And by the way, let me just say, I welcome this. I want Kamala Harris out there. In fact, Joe Biden should stay in the basement and Kamala should do all the campaigning. Represent the administration. I want as much Kamala Harris as I can get. Let's put her in front of the American people. Because when she appears in public, it's gold, like this.
Remember Venn diagrams, those 3 circles? Right. And then let's just see where they overlap.
You will not be surprised because I have constructed a Venn diagram on this. Remember those 3 circles, how they overlap?
I love Venn diagrams, so I just do. Whenever you're dealing with conflict, pull out a Venn diagram, right? And so, the 3 circles. And so I asked my team, right? They're fantastic. Out right now. He sees the Venn diagram of it all. He sees that there are those circles, and maybe people seem that they're a little different. They live in different parts of the country. They may be different age or different race. But that area in the middle, that overlap. I asked my team to do a Venn diagram of where these attacks are happening. So voting rights, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights. And, of course, there was a huge intersection. I asked my team to do a Venn diagram for me of where we are seeing attacks and who are the attacks against and the similarity. And when you look at a diagram of just a Venn diagram in that regard, it tells a...
That's a winning message. I'm telling you, we need more Kamala. Let's go. That's it for tonight. More to come tomorrow. Same time, same place. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.